Welcome to the Urban Herald, where we take a deep dive into the stories shaping our world. Today, as part of the Urban Herald team, we're looking at something, well, pretty unique. Have you ever stopped and wondered how a man, a figure really defined by 6 corporate bankruptcies, 34 criminal convictions, countless legal battles, how he not only survived all that, but actually thrived, and even became president twice? It's a question that really pushes against everything we think we know about accountability in public life, and we're going to try and unpack that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Our mission here as analysts for the Urban Herald is to really dig into that complex web. The business dealings, the legal fights, the controversies, they've all consistently shaped Donald Trump's career. And look, we're not here to take sides. That's not the goal. Our job is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from, extensive sources. We want to reveal some, let's say, uncomfortable truths about power, about accountability, and maybe even about the nature of American democracy itself, especially now as he starts his second term in 2025.
Right. Think of this as maybe your shortcut to understanding how someone can actually turn notoriety, even infamy, into real political capital. We'll trace it all the way from his early business moves right through to the whole Mar-a-Lago situation. And I think what we uncover might challenge some assumptions you hold about consequences, about how things are supposed to work in public life. You might find yourself saying, okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
And just so you know, this analysis isn't just off the cuff. It's drawn from a lot of research, deep research, that includes our own reporting here at the Urban Herald, especially from reports like Donald Trump, the untold story behind America's most controversial figure, and the enigma of Donald Trump. We've pulled it all together to give you the clearest picture we can.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. To really get the foundation, we need to go back. Donald Trump, born June 14, 1946. He was born into wealth, right? New York real estate family. His father, Fred Trump, he was a big deal after World War II.
Oh, definitely. A prominent builder and investor. Fred focused mainly on middle-class housing, Queens, Brooklyn, that kind of thing. So Donald grew up seeing it all firsthand, watching his father build, negotiate. It was like a masterclass in New York real estate from day one.
An education you probably couldn't get anywhere else, really. He was initially involved in those kinds of urban revitalization projects, too, before he, well, really struck out on his own path.
That direct experience was huge, absolutely formative. But what's interesting is how Donald, by the 70s, started to, move away from his father's model. Queens and Brooklyn weren't enough. He wanted Manhattan, the big time, the glamour, the high stakes.
By aiming higher.
Exactly. He started tackling these really ambitious, flashy urban development projects, building his own brand separate from Fred. And this period is crucial because it shows his willingness to take huge risks, chase visibility, and importantly, use his own name as a powerful marketing tool. That ambition, it set the tone for everything.
And as he was making his mark in Manhattan, it didn't take long for controversy to find him, or maybe he found it. In 1973, he's only 27, young. And suddenly, he and the Trump Management Corporation are facing major accusations from the Department of Justice.
Yeah, their first really big public storm. The accusation was serious. Systematic racial discrimination against Black people looking to rent apartments. Not just one or two incidents, but a pattern.
A pattern. How did that supposedly work?
Well, the specifics laid out in the lawsuit are pretty stark. Federal prosecutors allege the Trumps used a kind of coded system. Basically, applications from Black potential tenants were marked with a C for colored, secretly.
Wow. Just blatant.
It was a deliberate method to identify and then reject Black applicants without leaving an obvious paper trail. A really chilling example of the discriminatory practices common back then.
And this wasn't just a New York thing, right?
Yeah.
This kind of discrimination was widespread.
Oh, absolutely. To put it in context, recent studies estimate that practices like these affected something like 3.8 million Black families across the U.S. in the 70s. So the Trump case wasn't just about one company. It was a significant moment in the wider civil rights struggle, highlighting a systemic issue that denied housing opportunities to millions.
So, okay, he's 27, facing these incredibly serious federal charges. How does he react? Does he try to make amends? Apologize?
His reaction then was, well, it was a preview of a strategy we'd see again and again. Instead of admitting anything, he went on the attack. He countersued the government for defamation, asking for $100 million, called the accusations absolutely ridiculous.
$100 million? That's aggressive.
Extremely aggressive. Pure denial, immediate counterpunch. The case eventually settled in 1975, no admission of guilt from the Trumps. But the settlement did legally require them to follow non-discriminatory practices and, significantly, to advertise vacancies in minority publications to try and ensure fair access.
So settlement, but no admission.
Exactly. And John O'Brien, a housing rights lawyer who knew the scene well, called the case emblematic of systematic racial exclusion in New York real estate. This whole episode basically established Trump's playbook. Deny everything, deflect blame, and counterattack as hard as possible, a strategy he'd used for decades.
Speaking of foundations, Trump Tower was probably his most iconic building, right?
Yeah.
The symbol of his success. But its construction seems to have its own dark story.
It really does. It adds another complicated layer to how that empire was built. The construction back in the early 80s heavily involved what became known as the Polish Brigade. About 200 undocumented Polish immigrants. They were doing the demolition work on the old building, and the conditions were described as, well, brutal.
Brutal how?
Grueling 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, safety equipment, reportedly totally inadequate. Wages were incredibly low, like $4 or $5 an hour. That was less than half the union rate back then. Several workers got seriously injured. One man, his arm was permanently disfigured by falling steel. It's a very stark contrast to the luxury image of the finished tower.
That's awful.
Yeah.
And was Trump aware of this? Or was he sort of detached from the day-to-day on-site?
Court testimony strongly suggests he was directly involved. It makes it hard to argue he didn't know. In fact, a federal court ruled in 1991 that Trump had conspired with a union leader specifically to withhold about $325,000 in benefit payments that these workers were owed.
He conspired to withhold payments.
That's what the court found. And Barbara Rez, who was a top executive in the Trump organization then, she testified. She said Trump personally negotiated with the Polish workers. She said he was often on site, saw the conditions, even promised to pay them himself when their contractor couldn't. But then, reportedly, when legal issues started piling up, Trump allegedly threatened to call immigration, threatened to have them deported.
Threatened deportation after promising to pay them.
That's what was alleged. One of the workers, Zbigniew Gorin, gave really harrowing testimony. He talked about the horrific conditions sleeping on the demolition site floors. And he said, Mr. Trump would walk through, see us there, and never said anything about improving our situation.
So the case eventually settled.
Yes, finally. In 1999, it dragged on for years. But the settlement amount was undisclosed, sealed, so no full public accounting of what happened.
The irony is just staggering, isn't it? This monument to American success, built by exploited immigrant labor, by a man who later built his political platform on cracking down on immigration.
The irony is definitely profound, and it also connects to the wider context of New York construction back then.
How so?
Well, it was pretty widely known that many construction unions in New York at that time had significant ties to or were influenced by the mafia, organized crime.
Right, that was part of the landscape.
Absolutely. For developers, dealing with unions could mean dealing with extortion, controlled materials, manipulated labor, all linked to organized crime figures. So Trump choosing to use non-union, undocumented labor like the Polish Brigade, it was cheaper, yes, but it also meant operating outside those potentially compromised union structures.
But did that keep him away from organized crime or draw him closer in other ways?
That's the complex part. It inevitably brought him into proximity with that world. And later, especially with his casino ventures in Atlantic City, allegations of connections to organized crime figures kept surfacing. Reports suggested he sometimes had to negotiate with, or maybe inadvertently work with, individuals linked to the mafia to get his huge projects built, get approvals, navigate the system.
And his response to those allegations?
He always flatly denied any improper involvement. He basically framed it as, that's just how business was done in those places at that time, part of the territory. But these stories definitely added another layer of controversy to his image, a suggestion of willingness to, let's say, operate in the gray areas to get what he wanted.
Okay, so let's move into those casino years.
Yeah.
If the early stuff was complex, Atlantic City in the 80s and 90s, that seems like a whole new level of, well, chaos. Not just minor issues, but a string of really spectacular corporate failures, costing investors massive amounts of money.
Oh, the scale of the financial disaster in Atlantic City is truly something. Take the Trump Taj Mahal. He called it the eighth wonder of the world when it opened in 1990. But it opened already buried under almost $1 billion in debt. $1 billion!
Right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate. And the reality hit fast. Within its first year, it was reportedly losing $2 million a week, just hemorrhaging cash.
$2 million a week. How long could that last?
Not long at all.
Yeah.
It filed for bankruptcy within a year of opening, and it wasn't alone. Trump Plaza, Trump Castle,
Yeah.
they followed the same path. Ultimately, the parent company, Trump Entertainment Resorts, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 4 separate times. The last one was in 2009. These weren't just bumps in the road, they were repeated, massive corporate collapses.
And when you say corporate collapse, what did that mean for people on the ground? Investors, employees, the city itself?
The fallout was very real. Looking at the numbers for his casino era, total debt piled up over $3 billion. Estimated losses for investors, around $1.5 billion.
Yeah. Trump himself had personal guarantees on debt reaching $832 million at one point. In total, across all his businesses, it adds up to 6 corporate bankruptcies, which is unusual for a major business figure. And the human cost, about 3,000 jobs were lost directly from these casino failures. That hit Atlantic City hard.
So billions in debt, thousands jobless, repeated bankruptcies. Why didn't this completely tank his career? How did he personally manage to walk away relatively okay?
This is where we get into what people call his art of failing upward. It's more than just luck, though. It's about understanding and, frankly, exploiting the system. He became incredibly adept at using Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, Chapter 11 is designed to let companies reorganize, restructure debt, maybe survive.
Right, to save the business, ideally.
Ideally. But Trump used it masterfully to shed enormous debts onto others, the banks, the bondholders, the investors, while he often managed to keep control of the assets, or at least his name on them. He essentially socialized the losses, pushed them onto others, while privatizing any remaining gains or brand value. It was a way of leveraging failure itself.
That sounds less like failing and more like strategic financial maneuvering. Very aggressive maneuvering.
It was extremely aggressive. Marvin Roffman, the analyst who got fired for predicting the Taj Mahal would fail before it opened.
I remember that.
Right. He had this great observation. He said, Trump understood that in the casino business, the house always wins, but he structured deals so that he was the house, not the casinos themselves.
So he insulated himself personally from the business's failing.
Precisely. He positioned himself to extract value even when the underlying businesses were collapsing. And these failures actually forced a major pivot in his business model. After the bankruptcies, he really shifted away from owning and operating things directly. His main focus became licensing his name, putting the Trump brand on buildings, products, whatever.
Ah, the licensing deals.
Exactly. He'd collect fees for using his name, generating revenue without needing huge capital investment or taking on the operational risks. Selling the brand, not the building itself.
And did that work out for him financially, even as the companies struggled?
The data is pretty stark. By 2004, the stock price for his publicly traded casino company had dropped about 90% from its IPO. Shareholders were wiped out. Yet during that same period from 1995 to 2004, SEC filings show Trump himself received $44.3 million in compensation from that very company.
$44 million, while the company's stock tanked.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates his ability to personally profit even amidst widespread corporate failure. It's quite remarkable, in a way.
Okay, so he mastered business failure. But then there's the media. Long before politics, he seemed to grasp something fundamental about attention, didn't he? That controversy equals attention, and attention equals value. Even bad attention.
That's absolutely right. And it wasn't just instinct, it was a strategy he honed over decades. It laid the groundwork for his political rise. He didn't just get media coverage, he commanded it. Think about that 2016 Harvard study. It estimated he got $5.6 billion with a B worth of free media during the campaign.
$5.6 billion. Free.
Free media. Earned media, they call it. More than double his closest rival. And that wasn't luck. It was because he constantly generated controversy, dominated news cycles, made himself impossible to ignore. He understood that in today's media world, being talked about, period, is the ultimate currency. Good, bad. Sometimes it didn't matter as much as just being the center of attention.
Which brings us to maybe the ultimate test of that theory. The Access Hollywood tape. October 2016. That should have been fatal for any campaign.
Oh, it detonated like a bomb. The tape from 2005 with him making those incredibly crude comments about women that grab them by the pussy line. It was shocking.
The reaction was immediate, right? And Republicans pulling endorsements left and right.
Within 48 hours, yeah. Something like 36 Republican members of Congress bailed, withdrew their endorsements. The condemnation was fast and widespread. It looked like game over.
But his response wasn't typical, was it? He didn't just issue a standard apology and try to lay low.
Not at all. It was a masterclass in his particular brand of crisis management. A multi-pronged attack, really. First, minimize. Dismiss it as locker room talk. Trivializing it. Second, deflect. almost immediately pivot to attacking opponents, bringing up Bill Clinton's past, for instance. And third, double down. Reinforce his core message, rally his base, paint himself as the victim of a media and establishment hit job.
So instead of putting out the fire, he basically started other fires to distract everyone.
Exactly. Frank Luntz, the political strategist, put it well at the time. He said Trump understood you don't survive scandal by apologizing anymore. You survive by creating new controversies that push the old ones off the front page.
And incredibly, it worked. Despite that tape, despite other allegations that came out, he won.
He won. It defied all political logic. But it was undeniable proof of the power of his media manipulation skills and his connection with a part of the electorate that didn't care about conventional rules or even saw breaking them as a plus.
So the big question remains, how does all that negative coverage actually help him? It seems so backward.
It does seem backward, but you have to understand the modern attention economy. It's the strange, symbiotic relationship he has with the media, even when they're critical. Media outlets need content. They thrive on clicks, ratings, engagement. And Trump provides endless controversy-driven content. It's irresistible for viewership.
So they cover him constantly, even if it's negative, because it brings eyeballs.
Precisely. Studies during his presidency showed major networks gave him something like 92% negative coverage. 92%. But that constant coverage, even negative, kept him perpetually at the center of the national conversation. He dominated the news cycle, shaped the agenda simply by being the main topic, day in, day out.
So the criticism itself keeps him relevant.
In a very real way, yes. The data showed news program ratings jumped on average 23% when they were covering Trump stories. That's a huge financial incentive for the media to keep covering him. At the end of the day, in this attention economy, being ignored is political death. Being criticized constantly. For Trump, that seemed to be survivable, even beneficial. He understood that better than anyone.
Okay, so he masters business, masters media. Then comes the presidency. And that period was defined by conflict, wasn't it? Clashes with institutions, norms, leading to not one but two impeachments. Unprecedented.
Truly unprecedented. The first impeachment, 2019 into 2020, stemmed from that phone call in July 2019 with President Zelensky of Ukraine. That call really exposed his willingness to use the power of the presidency for, well, personal political advantage.
Right, the perfect phone call, as he called it. What was the substance of the issue there?
The core issue, as laid out in the investigation, was Trump pressuring Zelensky to announce investigations into Joe Biden and his son Hunter, his political rival. And crucially, this pressure was being applied while the U.S. was withholding nearly $400 million in military aid that Congress had already approved for Ukraine.
Aid they desperately needed.
Right.
Given their situation with Russia.
Desperately needed. Ukraine was actively fighting Russian-backed forces, losing soldiers every month, about 13 soldiers a month on average at that time. So withholding that aid while asking for a political favor looked like a clear quid pro quo, using vital security assistance as leverage for domestic political gain.
And people within his own administration were concerned.
Deeply concerned. John Bolton, his former national security advisor, not exactly a liberal, later wrote that this wasn't isolated. He called it part of a pattern of using presidential power for personal benefit.
So the House impeached him. What were the specific charges?
2 articles of impeachment. First, abuse of power using his office for personal gain and undermining national security. Second, obstruction of Congress, actively blocking the House investigation into the matter. The votes were largely along party lines. 230-197 on abuse of power, 229-198 on obstruction, making him the third U.S. president ever impeached.
But the Senate acquitted him.
Yes, in February 2020, the Republican-controlled Senate acquitted him on both charges. The outcome reflected the deep partisan divide more than, say, a consensus on the evidence presented.
Okay, so that was the first impeachment. If that showed a willingness to abuse power, the second impeachment following January 6th, 2021, that seemed to be about something even more fundamental, undermining democracy itself.
January 6th was a watershed moment. After losing the 2020 election, Trump relentlessly pushed baseless claims of widespread voter fraud. This culminated in the attack on the U.S. Capitol while Congress was certifying the election results.
The images from that day were just unbelievable. What were the immediate consequences?
The immediate consequences were severe. 5 deaths were directly linked to the events of that day. Over 138 police officers were injured defending the Capitol.
138 officers injured?
Yes, and the physical damage to the Capitol building itself exceeded $30 million. The ongoing investigation became the largest in FBI history, over 12,265 arrests nationwide related to the riot as of early 2025.
And the charge against Trump was inciting this, based on his words that day.
Yes, his speech just before the riot, where he told supporters, we're going to walk down to the Capitol, you have to show strength, was seen by many as direct incitement. The House moved incredibly quickly this time. They voted 232-197 to impeach him for incitement of insurrection. Significantly, 10 Republicans joined the Democrats in voting to impeach.
10 Republicans. That was a notable break.
It was, including figures like Liz Cheney. It showed the depth of concern across party lines about his actions related to the peaceful transfer of power.
What evidence came out during the second Senate trial? Was it just about that one speech?
The trial presented evidence of a much broader, coordinated campaign to overturn the election. It detailed his efforts to pressure state officials, like those 31 calls to Georgia officials trying to get them to find votes. It also documented the relentless spread of disinformation about fraud, designed to sow doubt and anger among his supporters.
Even his own attorney general didn't buy the fraud claims, right?
Right. William Barr testified he repeatedly told Trump the claims were bullshit. But Trump kept pushing them publicly.
And yet, the Senate acquitted him again.
Acquitted again. 57 senators voted to convict, which is a majority, but it was short of the two-thirds needed. 10 Republicans voted guilty this time, but it wasn't enough. Like the first impeachment, the acquittal largely came down to political calculations and the reality of partisan loyalty in the Senate, rather than a full exoneration based on the facts. It really highlighted how polarized the country remained.
So he leaves office, twice impeached, sets up shop at Mar-a-Lago, and then comes the documents saga. This felt different somehow, a direct national security issue.
It did feel different. The discovery of hundreds of classified documents at his private residence wasn't just a procedural error. It suggested a really startling disregard for national security protocol.
How many documents are we talking about, and what kind?
The scale was significant. The FBI found over 300 documents marked classified. Among them, reports indicated materials related to nuclear capabilities, both U.S. and foreign, and highly sensitive intelligence sources and methods.
Nuclear information, stored at a private club.
That was the allegation and the concern. Former CIA Director John Brennan called it potentially one of the gravest breaches of national security protocols, emphasizing the risk to human intelligence sources. Breaking it down, there were 18 marked top secret, 54 secret, 31 confidential, plus around 11,000 other unclassified government documents that should have gone to the National Archives. It showed a systemic failure to handle presidential records properly.
And wasn't there evidence he tried to hide them, even after being asked for them back?
Absolutely. That became a key part of the case. Obstruction. There was security footage showing boxes being moved after the government issued a subpoena demanding their return.
Moving boxes after a subpoena, that looks bad.
It looks very bad. And one of his lawyers signed a statement attesting that all classified materials had been returned, which the FBI search later proved false. This combination, unauthorized retention and apparent obstruction, led to a federal indictment with 40 felony counts. The way the documents were stored in a bathroom, a ballroom, storage areas just amplified the concerns about carelessness and disregard for their sensitivity.
And then came the New York hush money trial in 2024, making actual history. First former president ever convicted of a crime.
A truly historic moment. The conviction stemmed from that $130,000 payment made to Stormy Daniels back in October 2016, right before the election, to silence her story about an alleged affair years earlier.
But the crime wasn't the payment itself, was it? It was how it was recorded.
Exactly. Hush money isn't inherently illegal. The crime, according to the prosecution and the jury's verdict, was falsifying business records. 34 felony counts of it. They found he disguised the reimbursement payments to his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who made the initial payment to Daniels, labeling them as legal expenses in the Trump Organization's books to hide their true purpose.
And the prosecution argued this was about influencing the election.
That was the core argument. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg put it plainly. This case was never about the sexual encounter. It was about a deliberate scheme to corrupt the 2016 election by suppressing damaging information just weeks before voters went to the polls.
And the trial revealed this wasn't just a one-off payment, but part of a bigger operation.
Yes, prosecutors laid out evidence of what they called a catch-and-kill scheme, developed with David Pecker, the head of American Media, Inc., which publishes the National Enquirer.
Catch and kill.
Yeah, the idea was to identify potentially damaging stories about Trump, buy the rights to them, and then bury them, catch the story, and kill it. Testimony revealed AMI paid $150,000 to Karen McDougal, another woman alleging an affair, and $30,000 to a Trump Tower doorman with another story. It painted a picture of a systematic effort to control information.
So 34 felony convictions. What was the immediate impact?
politically, financially. The verdict was guilty on all 34 counts. The maximum potential sentence technically adds up to 136 years, though the actual sentence was still pending as we entered 2025. But the immediate political impact was, well, classic Trump phenomenon. His campaign claimed they raised $53 million in donations in the 24 hours after the verdict.
$53 million, after being convicted of 34 felonies.
Astonishing, right? And polling showed it barely dented his support among his base. If anything, it seemed to energize them further.
Which brings us to the core puzzle. How does he do it? How does someone survive career-ending scandals, bankruptcies, legal defeats, impeachments, even criminal convictions, and often come out seemingly stronger?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer isn't simple luck. It's a cultivated, deeply ingrained approach, a kind of psychological playbook. It seems to operate on 3 core rules. 1, never admit fault, never show weakness. That just invites more attacks. 2, counterattack with maximum aggression. Shift the focus, put the accuser on defense. 3, maintain absolute message discipline within your base. Create an alternate reality where you're always the victim, always fighting the good fight.
Deny, attack, control the narrative.
Pretty much. It's a trifecta that lets him frame events, manage perceptions, and defy the political gravity that would pull down almost anyone else.
Can we break down those pillars of survival a bit more? How do they work in practice?
Okay, let's look closer. First, information warfare. Trump is a master of flooding the zone. When a bad story hits, he doesn't just issue one denial. He or his team throws out multiple, sometimes contradictory counter-narratives. Think about the post-2020 election fraud claims. It wasn't one consistent story. It was a barrage of different allegations, shifting targets. It exhausts the media, confuses the public, and makes it hard for any single fact to cut through the noise.
Keep throwing mud, basically.
Something like that. Second, tribal loyalty. He brilliantly frames every attack on him as an attack on his supporters. Every indictment is proof of the witch hunt by the deep state or the radical left. This transforms legal problems from liabilities into rallying cries. It strengthens the bond with his base, creates an us versus them siege mentality. The hush money conviction becoming a fundraising bonanza is a perfect example.
They feel like they're under attack with him.
Exactly. And the third pillar is institutional exploitation. He seems to understand, maybe intuitively, that our institutions, courts, Congress, investigations move slowly, deliberately. He weaponizes that slowness. By the time one scandal is fully investigated or adjudicated, he's already moved on, created 3 new controversies. He outruns accountability by constantly changing the subject, exhausting his opponents.
It's a relentless pace.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do this alone, right? There has to be a network supporting him, enablers, fixers.
Oh, absolutely crucial. It's easy to focus on the individual, but Trump's career has been facilitated by a vast network. It starts way back with mentors like Roy Cohn, the infamous lawyer who taught him to always attack, never apologize, use the media.
Cohn was notorious.
Exactly, and it extends to thousands of lawyers over the years. Over 3,500 have reportedly represented him. Accountants, business partners, media figures who give him airtime, financial institutions that kept lending him money despite the bankruptcies. Think about it. 62 former White House officials wrote tell-all books. That gives you a sense of the sheer number of people who have been involved in his orbit, enabling or reacting to him.
Can you give a concrete example of that network in action? Like during the Access Hollywood crisis?
Perfect example. When that tape dropped, it wasn't just Trump issuing a statement, it was a full-court press by his network. You had surrogates hitting the airwaves, attacking the media, changing the subject to the Clintons. You had campaign advisors crafting the locker room talk messaging. You had allies working to minimize the damage among evangelical leaders and the base. It was a coordinated effort involving legal strategy, media manipulation, political messaging, all working together to cushion the blow and allow him to survive what looked like a fatal wound. It shows the machine behind the man.
And somehow, despite all of that history, the bankruptcies, the scandals, the impeachments, the convictions he pulls off, maybe the biggest comeback of all, winning the presidency again in 2024, it just defies belief.
The numbers alone are staggering when you put them side by side with the win. 91 criminal charges across 4 jurisdictions, 34 felony convictions, over $500 million in civil judgments against him.
And he still wins. By millions of votes.
Wins the popular vote by 2.3 million. It tells you something profound, not just about him, but about the state of American politics, maybe about celebrity, accountability. He understood something critical. In this media age, being ignored is worse than being criticized. His legal battles, paradoxically, kept him front and center, constantly in the news, constantly reminding people he was fighting the system.
So the legal troubles actually helped him politically, the ultimate paradox.
It seems that way. It's the ultimate paradox of accountability. While opponents focused on the legal cases as disqualifying, Trump skillfully reframed them. He kept his message focused on the things that got him elected in the first place: economic anxiety, cultural grievances, anger at elites and institutions. And he wove his legal fights into that narrative. They became Exhibit A in the witch hunt against him and, by extension, against his supporters.
And the polling backed that up. People bought into the witch hunt narrative.
Overwhelmingly among his base. 2024 polling showed something like 73% of Republicans saw the prosecutions as politically motivated. Even more striking, 82% of Trump voters said the legal troubles made them more likely to support him.
More likely, not less.
More likely. Only about 3% of his base peeled off after the convictions. It solidified his support, didn't erode it. As Larry Sabato, the political scientist, said, Trump rewrote the rules of political survival. In a polarized environment, scandal doesn't destroy candidates. It crystallizes support along partisan lines. That's a huge shift.
So fast forward to January 2025. He's inaugurated for a second term. America's in completely uncharted territory, right? A convicted felon in the Oval Office. Someone under active prosecution leading the executive branch.
Uncharted is exactly the word. Constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe called it a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions. The founders, the whole system of checks and balances, it just wasn't designed for this scenario. A twice-impeached, criminally convicted president returning to power. It forces us to confront the limits of the system, especially the parts that rely on unwritten norms and conventions, not just black-letter law.
What are the immediate questions this raises? Legally, constitutionally.
Huge questions. How does the sitting president deal with ongoing state criminal cases, like the one in Georgia? Can a state prosecute the president of the United States? It's never happened. Then there's presidential immunity. Does it shield him from those state charges or from federal charges related to his first term? How does being a convicted felon interact with the powers and immunities of the presidency? These aren't abstract anymore. They're real-time crises.
So where do things stand legally for him? As of early 2025, it must be a tangled mess.
It's incredibly complex. The federal cases stemming from his first term, likely to be dismissed or deferred based on presidential immunity arguments, that's the general expectation. But the state cases, that's the constitutional flashpoint. Can Georgia, for example, put a sitting president on trial? Unclear. Then you've got the civil judgments, over $500 million pending appeal. That's a huge financial weight. And reports suggest multiple state AGs are gearing up for new investigations. The legal battles are far from over. They're going to be a constant backdrop to his second term.
Looking beyond the immediate legal chaos, what about the long-term impact, the Trump legacy? What does this whole saga mean for American democracy itself? Did he break the system or just expose existing cracks?
That's the fundamental question historians will grapple with for decades. Did he break norms? Absolutely, undeniably, repeatedly. But the bigger question is, can those norms, once broken so publicly and arguably successfully, ever be fully restored? So many of the guardrails we thought protected democracy were based on voluntary compliance, on tradition, on shame even. Not always hard law.
Things presidents just didn't do before.
Exactly. Trump showed those unwritten rules were perhaps more fragile than we realized. Stuart Stevens, the former Republican strategist, had that really stark take. Trump didn't break the system. He revealed it was already broken. It suggests his rise, his survival, his return. It says as much about the vulnerabilities in the system, polarization, media dynamics, erosion of trust, as it does about him individually. His legacy might force a really painful but necessary reevaluation of whether our institutions are truly fit for the 21st century.
So wrapping up this deep dive from the Urban Herald team, it feels like we've seen three critical lessons emerge from Trump's path. First, traditional accountability legal consequences, media scandals, political norms. They just don't seem to work the way they used to, especially in this digital, hyper-partisan age.
Right. They don't automatically end careers anymore.
Second, controversy has become actual currency in the attention economy. Being constantly attacked, if managed right, can keep you more relevant and visible than playing by the old rules.
Attention is the goal, regardless of the tone.
And third, deep polarization acts like a shield. Scandals that might have once united opposition now just seem to deepen the divides, hardening support among the base instead of eroding it.
Yeah, it solidifies the tribes rather than creating consensus. And the untold story of Donald Trump ultimately might force us to confront a really uncomfortable truth. That in America today, what accountability means is maybe far more complicated, maybe more troubling than we thought. This is a man who built an empire, partly on exploited labor, who survived bankruptcies that ruined others, who weathered scandals that would sink anyone else, who turned criminal charges into fundraising tools. And he proved, again, that for some, the normal rules just don't seem to apply. The question left hanging is, can American democracy withstand the lesson? Can the system adapt, or has something fundamental been broken?
A lot to think about there. We hope this deep dive from the Urban Herald team has given you some valuable insights and plenty to consider as we all try to make sense of the world around us. Join us next time for more explorations into the stories that shape our lives.